On the day of the Brazilian Grand Prix, Wham became the first Western band to perform in China, playing at the Workers' Stadium in Beijing as part of a 10-day tour. Footage from the tour was later used in the video for the single Freedom. The Albanian dictator Enver Hoxha died of a recurrence of the heart trouble he had been suffering from for years. Hoxha's rule had left the country economically stagnant and politically isolated even from other members of the communist world, and was described by many as a European North Korea. A bomb exploded in a restaurant in Madrid, killing 18 people and injuring 82 others, including several American Air Force officers from the nearby Torrejón Air Base. It was the worst attack in Spain since the Civil War. Both Basque separatist group ETA and the Islamic Jihad organisation claimed responsibility, and although the case was never officially solved and no arrests were ever made, investigations concluded that it was probably an attack by the Islamist group targeted at US personnel. In South Africa, the Immorality Act 1957 and the Mixed Marriages Act 1949, which had criminalised relationships and marriages between white and non-white people, were repealed. Opponents of apartheid were naturally pleased, but warned there was still a very long way to go. And on the day of the Portuguese Grand Prix, Tancredo Neves, who had been elected president of Brazil in January, died of diverticulitis just days before his inauguration as the first democratically elected president since the military coup of 1964. Meanwhile, the teams were back at Estoril for the second time in 3 races, and there was plenty to talk about. The Zakspeed team would be making their debut, resplendent in the red and white colours of tobacco sponsors West instead of the silver they'd worn in testing. But most were more interested in the occupant of the number 28 Ferrari, because René Arnoux had left Maranello under mysterious circumstances. Neither he or the prancing horse had any comment to make on the matter, and in his place sat Stefan Johansson. The Tollman team still had no tyres, so Alex Hawkridge had released Johansson from his contract to allow the Swede to drive for Ferrari for the rest of the season. Hawkridge and co, for their part, were in attendance at Estoril, hoping to score a last-minute deal, but nothing was forthcoming and the cars stayed resolutely put on the trailers. So, 26 entries for 26 slots meant that once again all would qualify. As for the circuit, the main straight had been resurfaced, drainage improved, and many of the rough edges from last year sanded off and given a polish. Despite the mechanic spending some time rectifying the misfire that was plaguing him in Brazil, it was Ayrton Senna who dominated qualifying, top on both Friday and Saturday, and taking his first career pole position by 4/10 over Alain Prost, with Rosberg and De Angelis on row 2. Alboreto was 5th alongside Warwick, an encouraging performance from Derek after his woes in Brazil, and Lauda was 7th, alongside an equally encouraged De Cesaris 8th, and the top man on Pirelli tyres. Mansell and Piquet were 9th and 10th, with Johansson beginning his Ferrari career 11th alongside Tombe. Jonathan Palmer put the Zakspeed a creditable 23rd, still over 7 seconds off pole, and Martini was 25th, improving his times greatly between Friday and Saturday, and benefiting from Piercarlo Gonzani's car troubles that prevented him from setting a time in the second session. Sunday dawned cold and grey, with some very threatening-looking clouds on the horizon and a stiff breeze whipping in off the Atlantic. It rained on and off during the morning, and by the time the teams were coming out onto the grid, the track was wet and the umbrellas were out, but the rain had stopped and the teams were left with a dilemma about whether to go with slicks, wets or intermediates. Cheever, Martini and Mansell all spun out on the warm-up lap and had to start from the pit lane, so everyone started on wets. The remaining 23 cars took the start and off they went, with Rosberg stalling and being clobbered from behind by Palmer's flying Zakspeed, but meanwhile Senna led comfortably away, while De Angelis charged ahead of Prost to go second, with Alboreto, Warwick and Lauda following into the first corner. A shove got Rosberg moving again, but Zakspeed's debut would be a short one indeed, as Palmer trickled in at the end of lap 1 with broken suspension. Mansell had another spin on his first lap out. One can almost imagine Peter Ward chuckling to himself as he watched Nigel's replacement leading his first race and looking perfectly at home. In fact, the two Loti were easing away from Prost, while Lauda had moved up to 5th place behind Alboreto. Further back, Johansson was also putting on a great show as he moved up, now harrying Piquet for 9th, while being attacked by Patrese in his turn. The Pirelli wet tyres were turning out not to be in the same league as the Goodyears, and Piquet was having real trouble keeping the pair behind him, as his teammate Eno went skidding off into a barrier at about the same time as Alio, who was also on Pirellis. Patrese then took the heat off his old teammate Piquet by making a ridiculously overambitious move and nerfing himself and Johansson off the circuit. Perhaps in a case of poetic justice, Stefan kept the Ferrari going while Ricciardo was beached on the grass. All of which promoted Thierry Boutsen to 10th behind Piquet, and he lost no time pulling up behind the Brabham. Another incident missed by the cameras saw the two Germans, Beloff and Winkelhock, tangle, but both got going again, though the Tyrrell's nose cone looked rather the worse for wear. Things were clearly getting treacherous out there, as the leaders came round to lap the first of the backmarkers, Pierluigi Martini's Minardi. Mauro Baldi also had a spin in the Spirit and was nearly collected by Senna as he came through. Having nearly taken out the leader through no fault of his own, poor Mauro was then caught by De Angelis at an awkward moment, allowing Prost and Alboreto to catch right up to him before he could get past. Prost began to hassle De Angelis, looking for a way past, while Alboreto hung back a little to get a break from the spray, and they stayed like this for lap after lap, but Elio had the advantage of visibility and was able to position his car and hold off the McLaren. The two lapped Piquet like the Brabham was standing still, and a few laps later Nelson crawled into the pits for a new set of tyres to see if that would help. It didn't. Well, Lafitte brought his Ligier in to give up, saying the Pirelli tyres were so bad it was almost undrivable. Johansson had a spin and came in with a broken front wing, which was causing his front brakes to stick, repairs to which took several laps, while Baldi had yet another spin but once again kept going. Rosberg was next out when the Honda engine gave him all its power at once at the last turn, spinning him into the barriers and ending up in the worst possible place with a stalled engine and a hurt hand. He got to safety and let the marshals do their thing, but it had bottomed out and the inexperienced Portuguese marshals found it difficult to move, so it just stayed there for lap after lap while yellow flags were rather lackadaisically waved around it. The rain was now coming down even harder. By lap 20, Senna now had a huge lead of about 30 seconds over his teammate, with the De Angelis Prost Alboreto scrap in turn about 25 seconds ahead of the two Renaults of Tombe and Warwick, who were 5th and 6th, having both made their way ahead of Lauda. That is until Derek made a precautionary pit stop after grazing a barrier and let the champion through, along with the charging Mansell, who was now up to 7th after his earlier excursions. As the race approached half-distance, Prost continued to harass De Angelis, with Alboreto still following closely behind, as the three came round to lap Piquet once more. The Brazilian had been into the pits at least once more to no avail, and had clearly decided to write off the race as an extended test session. He eventually gave up and retired after 28 laps. Baldi finally made one spin too many, spreading debris and mud all over the track, and coming to rest right in the middle of the circuit, rather forlornly waving his arms as the rain intensified further. Once again, the marshals didn't show a huge amount of urgency in removing the stricken Spirit, as De Cesaris was called in by his team on Lafitte's advice to withdraw, even having difficulty going in a straight line down the pit lane. Senna was by now waving at the officials to stop the race as half-distance approached, when Prost hit a patch of standing water on the main straight, held it for a moment, then pirouetted into the wall and out of the race. That put Mansell up into the points, and the British driver had got his head down and driven a sensible race so far, and was beginning to close on 5th place Lauda, both now lapped by a flying Senna, who at half the planned distance was 47 seconds ahead of De Angelis, with the race looking certain to be either red flagged due to weather conditions or go to the 2-hour limit rather than the planned 71 laps. With Prost gone, Alboreto now took up the challenge, pulling up behind De Angelis and following closely, but was able to catch Elio napping and succeed where Prost had failed so often, easing through on the first corner on lap 43. A clearly annoyed De Angelis then compounded his error a few corners later by understeering off and motocrossing through the gravel and mud back onto the circuit. By now, Senna was nearly a full minute ahead of Alboreto, so there didn't seem to be much Michele could do about him short of hoping for an accident or breakdown, while De Angelis was dropping back towards Tombe and Lauda, who had Mansell right on his tail. While the cameras were focusing on De Angelis, Nigel made his way past and up into 5th. Soon Lauda had also lost 6th to Stefan Beloff, while Mansell came up to unlap himself from his former teammate De Angelis. There was little love lost between the two, and Elio didn't seem to want to let Nigel through, and before long Senna was up behind the pair of them to lap Mansell for the second time and De Angelis for the first. Niki Lauda toured in with an engine failure on lap 49, marking the first time since Dallas in 1984 that neither McLaren had finished, and bringing to a halt the team's winning streak, and Senna finally made his way past the Mansell-De Angelis scrap. By now it was clear that the race was going to run the full 2 hours, and most drivers seemed happy just to ease off, clock off the laps and stay on the track. De Angelis continued dropping back and lost 3rd place to Tombe, but otherwise the last few laps saw little change, and Ayrton Senna cruised home after 2 hours and 67 laps to take his first career win in just his 16th race, and had made it look easy, while Mansell nearly hit the back of the Lotus as it slowed for the line and had to skid over the grass to avoid him. Michele Alboreto came home second to go top of the drivers' standings going into Ferrari's home race at Imola, with Tombe a satisfied third, De Angelis a disappointed fourth after holding second for much of the race, Mansell picking up his first Williams points in fifth, and Stefan Bellof nursing his Tyrrell with the bent front wing home for a point in 6th. Warwick was 7th and effectively last, though Johansson, Ghinzani and Winkelhock were still running at the end 5, 6 and 17 laps adrift respectively after pit stops for repairs.